So now we wanted to just jump into some strategy and process, and this is hopefully just going to give you some ideas about the process to go through, the steps that you have to go through, and trying to help with your own internal strategy. But again, these are all things that you should be speaking to your internal IT people or your external IT company, certainly if you have one. And if you're still having trouble, you can always speak to us. So this is really our philosophy and really the philosophy amongst experts in cybersecurity that when you're doing it right, it's going to equate to 25% tools and 75% of what we refer to as hygiene. Hygiene is all that process and procedure around checking manual checks to understand settings and security that you have in place, but also how these tools that you're going to deploy are managed, maintained, updated, secured, etc. The tools are critical. The hygiene is just much more important. So the first real step in the process is assessing your own risks. Um, so you could ask yourself, here's just some questions that you could ask yourself. There's probably a whole bunch more, really, to determine, what actions you're going to want to take and where you sit with this. But look, do you house sensitive data, personal data? Are you like a law firm, keeping client information? Are you storing any kind of financial information? All those are important. And if you have sensitive data like that, absolutely, you need to be doing everything, that you possibly can within your own means to be protecting yourself. Do you require compliance? If you're storing financial information, credit card information, you probably have to follow and comply with PCI compliance. Some other businesses we're starting to see more and more compliance requirements coming out for things like SOC 2 compliance or following NIST compliance, CIS controls. They're some of the bigger names in compliance. What would happen if your data was exposed? I think you just need to do a bit of a tabletop exercise. Is your data sensitive? What would happen to your business? Things like that. What would happen if your clients found out that their information was exposed as a result of your breach? Because just so you know, if any data is stolen out of a breach, especially if it's any kind of personal information, even if it's just personal information about your own internal staff, doesn't matter. By law, through the PIPEDA Act, we are required here in Canada to report these breaches. What would happen if your client got breached as a result of your business getting breached? And I've heard this happen on several occasions. One business gets phished, somebody gives up their credentials, and now somebody sends a direct spear phishing campaign using a legitimate email address that they just breached into another client, and that client falls for it, but they have less security protocols and process in place. So the attacker is able to get further and further inside of their network than they did with the initial company, and they got it way, way worse. So I don't know, would this be a big issue for you? Is there the potential that you could lose clients because of things like this? And then lastly, what would downtime associated with a breach cost your business? Like, also a very important factor in trying to determine, what sort of investment are you going to make in cybersecurity to protect yourself. So the second area is analyzing where you're at. So, I've talked about audits before under the myths. Like, audits are great tools and a great way to understand exactly where you're at. Again, especially if you're not on any kind of a proactive service that's got really good reporting and lets you know exactly where you're at, I would highly recommend getting an audit done and or some type of gap analysis. So really, you want this audit to look at what are the tools that you have in place today, but all aspects of the tools. How are they configured today? Are they set up properly? Are they even the right tools that you need to be using? Are you missing some tools that you should have? Also, as part of the audit, looking at process as well. Again, understanding, is there a process for looking into these settings, and then obviously reporting results of that process and procedure to you as well. Because that's probably where some of the biggest gaps are going to exist in the lack of somebody proactively looking at all of these things, ensuring that you are protected. And then documentation, assessing what do you have as far as documentation, what's your process for documentation, and do you have up-to-date documentation? Also very critical. So one of the things that you can also do when you're analyzing, what type of a service model are you on? Because I can guarantee you, all right, so if you're a client of PACE, you're 100% on a proactive service. But if you're not working with us, you have to assess it. If you're on more of a reactive type service, and by that I mean you're working with an individual, you have an internal team or an external company or team, and basically you use them when you have a problem to solve a problem, or you make a request for them to set up equipment or something like that. And then they go away and just wait for a request to happen or an alert to go off or something like that to basically react to the situation. I guarantee you, if you're on that kind of a service model, you're going to have some kind of gaps. If you're on a proactive service, again, you need to first make sure it truly is proactive. So you need to see, the results of the proactive service. You should be getting reporting, and it should really be more like an ongoing assessment. So the next step is remediation and implementation. So you've, kind of assessed your risk levels and your risk tolerance. You've done kind of the audit to get a baseline of where you're at. So now you're going to do the remediation. So that's basically trying to fix and shore up what you have and kind of covering in on some of those gaps. So the first thing is tools. We 100% like a layered approach, but definitely you absolutely have to have the basic and mid-level types of tools that we talked about, and even now start considering that advanced level if you're not using it already. Also, you need to be implementing some sort of education and training, because that is, the human element is still probably the biggest vulnerability as it relates to cybersecurity. Certainly, there's the threats and exploitation of software and tools and things like that, but that human element is probably not going to go away. And cyber criminals are pretty smart right now and really good at it and making a lot of money at tricking people, and they're going to continue to do that and find new ways to do it. So yes, implementing a proactive process is really the only way to make sure that and ensure that you are 100% safe against cyber attacks. So we still feel it's the most critical part of any strategy you're going to have. I'm reiterating again, 25% tools, 75% hygiene, because without that right hygiene, even cybersecurity tools are vulnerable. So you need to make sure you have a really good process around tools management, around your systems, checking settings, etc. And then the documentation reporting. So if you look at any cybersecurity standard, I'm showing you a picture of the NIST framework here to the right. Documentation and keeping up-to-date documentation and identifying all of the assets that you need to protect is a core feature in any cybersecurity framework. So you can see it right there on the NIST visual there called Identify, and that's the area that relates to this. So documentation is critical, understanding all the hardware and software that you have, every user, as well as documenting certain process and procedure. It needs, the reporting that you have needs to be beyond the basics. Like we have this, basic canned report that we can spit out at the press of a button in our IT management software that'll show you things like, here's how many tickets you had last month, and here's how much system uptime you had, and here's how much data usage you have on your servers and whatnot. Look, it's useful information, but it's uber basic information that's not going to tell us anything critical about how safe you are. So the reporting really needs to show you the evidence of the process that's happening, behind the scenes, and that evidence of proactive process and procedure. So the last piece of it, a lot of people don't really have anything, but even having something super basic around a response plan, you can get very, very, detailed, and this could be a very, very big thing within your business. But the first thing with an incident response plan is, what's the expectation, as far as like recovery, and time to recovery, how you're going to recover, etc. But the key parts of any kind of incident response plan is going to be who's responsible. So at bare minimum, even if you don't have anything structured, at least naming who's going to be responsible, how are you going to communicate with your employees? Because that's one of the things that a lot of people are caught off guard by is, their systems are all compromised. And let's say they use, Teams and things like that. And all their systems has all the information, even all the contact information, like their cell phone numbers and things like that, all sit and reside within their system. So when they get compromised, now they don't have access to that, and they're scrambling how to communicate with all of their employees and team members. So that's a key piece of it. And you want to have some alternate means of communication, and the ability for people to know how to communicate with other employees and team members. And then, of course, recovery, again, having alternate plans for recovery, or potential alternate plans, additional sites, or do people temporarily work from home? Obviously, we've gotten all pretty used to that recently, haven't we? And gotten good at that. And the last piece is looking at insurance. So I really brought this up just because the changes have happened so rapidly around insurance that if you haven't in quite a while, you need to talk to your agent and have a conversation with them. I guarantee things have changed, and you don't want to be caught off guard for sure. But reviewing your current coverage, and also asking the question about exclusions too, because that is all going to be coming just like any other type of insurance as it evolves. Insurance companies are there to make money. And I guarantee you, once they stop making money or they start making less money, that's when all these changes start happening. And that's why we're seeing all these changes now, because there have been so many claims related to cybersecurity.